Welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Drkerryann, and on today's show, I'm going to be speaking with Janice Brownhill. She is the director of the Juvenile Justice Division at the Justice Resource Institute. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about healing from old emotional wounds. So if that's of interest to you, keep listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Drkerryann, and this is a talk show that's all about everything related to mental wellness in the Black community. So at any point in time during the show, if you have a question or a comment, you can give us a call at 617-238-7111. That's 617-238-7111. We're also streaming live on Facebook, so you can check in to Facebook Live at heat981fm.com. That's heat981fm.com on Facebook Live to check out the live stream. So welcome to the show. Today I have with me Ms. Janice Brownhill.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Janice is a LICSW, a licensed independent clinical social worker with over 13 years experience providing mental health services to marginalized youth, families, and adults. She is currently the director of the Juvenile Justice Division at the Justice Resource Institute. And she has done a lot in her past. She's worked as a social worker at the Boston Police Department for a long time. Yeah. You've also had roles like an adjunct professor at the Boston College School of Social Work. And you do a lot with the expansion of trauma-informed community-based mental health services. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and about, why you like doing what you do.
First of all, thank you so much for having me here and for lifting space for this conversation. So I see this work as truly my passion, and I can get up every day and really serve my community, help people. To me, it is about giving people the life that they deserve to have, healing pain, and really giving them resources, options, so people could really flourish in their life. I do believe that is possible for everyone. So anything that I do is centered around that, providing advocacy, lifting up voices, and actually fostering support that is needed to so people could flourish.
So helping people to live their best life. I love that. I think that's absolutely, one of the main goals of this show as well is like, what can we do to uplift the overall health of our community, but starting kind of with mental health,
Definitely.
And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to heal from old emotional wounds. I think this is one of those things that maybe people don't really talk much about. It's something that would affect us deeply, but there's not a lot of conversation about it, even though it has so much impact on the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And so I guess I wanted to start off with just kind of, even just building a case for like, why should we talk about healing from old emotional wounds? Why is this even important for our listeners?
Great. So I really wanted to focus on this topic because, quite frankly, I think as a society, we don't often talk about pain. We don't know how to talk about pain. And a lot of people are struggling or suffering privately. And being a social worker and at different points providing individual therapy, that's what led a lot of people to meet with me. And I really hear how deeply it's affecting people's lives, especially people of color, because when there isn't space for you to talk about your pain, oftentimes you're just isolated, feeling alone, feeling like you're crazy. It affects goals you go after. It just really affects the individual all around. And I think oftentimes we see a lot of people winning, right? And then and we want that for ourselves, but sometimes our pain gets us in the way. So sometimes in my work, when people are able to talk about pain and the different ways that it affect them, choices they make in their life, it really frees them up to live their best life, the life that they deserve. So I think it's so needed to talk about, and people need forums to talk about it and just like resources to talk about it. So that's why I think it's worth lifting up, particularly in our community, to really lean into how you talk about it, how you gain support, and to look at the different options that are out there to help you. Oftentimes we're talking about, meeting with a therapist, but as a therapist, I often tap in and share with my clients that healing happens in the space that we're in, but you could also do some things on your own. And I think that's what we'll focus on now, some things that you could continue to do to address pain that's coming up for you and put you on a path of healing.
Yeah, I think the idea of how to talk about it is really important because, I run into so many patients, so many clients who the idea of vulnerability is it's massive. This idea of who do you open up to, who do you share things with, what happens if you share those things. And I remember actually once talking to a patient about this idea of the pain of not dealing with things that have happened in the past and the pain of dealing with it. Either way, there's pain, but only one of those can lead to healing,
right?
Which could lead to eventually a reduction in the pain. So there's kind of sometimes this kind of nursing of the wound and this sense that, well, if I go to clean it, to treat it, it's going to sting, it's going to hurt even more. But after that, it will heal.
Yeah.
But some people don't want to. They're like, just don't touch it. Just leave it alone, and then it just festers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's why this topic is truly of interest to me, because after years of practicing meeting one-on-one with different people and really bearing witness to their pain and helping them on this journey, that idea of old wound comes up, right? And just kind of like how you're talking about it. When we've had experiences, traumatic experiences, the loss of a parent, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, financial abuse, it runs the gamut, whether in childhood or adulthood, they shape our worldview, they affect us. And so you find a lot of people are truly doing their best to avoid it. That's what you're really talking about, right. Not to go through the pain because it's not modeled how you do it. Especially in our community, because there's just this strong focus on really being strong. But what the pain does, it changes our worldview oftentimes. You find a lot of people are coming in with mindset like waiting for the other shoe to fall or avoiding certain situations because it will just bring up memories of how they were injured or hurt in the past. And or just really being extremely positive, so it's not all the time, it's a negative thing. We talk about people pleasers, and sometimes that could just really be hard and tough because that comes from some pain too, believe it or not. So when we develop these worldview, it's almost like it's an avoidance, if you may, that we are, and avoiding bringing it up, avoiding thinking about it. But what people are actually doing ultimately is they're not acknowledging the wound, not really looking at it. I'm very visual, so I use look a lot. And even though they're doing their best to avoid it, it's ever present, it's ever in their minds, it's ever different choices that they make in life, it's just ever there. So I find that when in my practice, a lot of people are coming in and they are, bringing up like, I really want closure from this. Like, why is this happening to me? Why does this keep on happening to me? Or they identify that there are certain patterns. And usually, even though that is the focus, they would, sprint to the end. As they sit down and talk with me, they're recounting what has happened to them. And sometimes for some folks, it's the first time they're really sharing that. So they're really dealing with all the emotions that come up connected to it and making sense of it, the experiences that they've had, attaching narratives to what they have. And so what I try to do, at least from very early on, is to get rid of that message of closure.
Or
that,
because it's a very popular message of like, oh, I have to feel closure in order to feel like I've healed. So that's interesting.
Yeah, because it's not a destination, and I think language is important as you're embarking and even thinking about emotional healing. If you think about it as a destination, that's where you have that sprint to the end and you're missing certain pieces. So what I'd like to offer or invite my clients that I work with to think about it as a journey, and every part of the way you're learning something about yourself. You're learning how you show up in the world and also what you need. And then you could kind of peel back and determine the type of self-care that you want to implement. So that is the first thing, really pulling that expectation of closure, because a lot of these things could be life standing with different point having different implication.
No, I like the idea that this kind of search for closure can trip us up.
Yeah.
And that there's a path and there's a journey, and really the focus should be on the journey, the I guess what we call the process, because we sometimes skip ahead. The process is difficult. We just want to get to the end.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of thought that there is this end point where everything is better. And life has never been that way. So I'm not sure why we expect that out of therapy. So that's really interesting. You use the word self-care. So is it a journey of self-care, or is it a journey that includes self-care?
Yes.
Okay.
Glad you asked that question. So it is a journey of discovery, and this we're talking about. So there is lots of message out there in which I appreciate. The field of mental health, or even talking about what mental health in the community has come a long way, where people have language such as self-care. Go walking, eat healthy, journal, just different things that we really talk about. And that's great. I'm excited that people have that in, their repertoire of things to do as they're thinking about their journey and path of healing. But what I find is that they don't often work, so what I'm talking about is really self-care 102. The other part where you're really doing this deeper work, and from that process determining what it is that you really do need to do to take care of yourself. And sometimes, take for example, journaling. A lot of people think that, writing it out, that's a helpful process, and it is helpful. It can be to process. But I think when you're on this healing path, there's something that you have to give yourself from it. So a lot of the times when I encourage clients to write it out, get it out there, but what are you giving yourself from that? Because oftentimes what we need is not to process what happened over and over again. It's just like, how is it showing up in my life now, and what it is I need in this moment. So I often, along with writing it out, because if that's where you're at, that's totally fine. Like, what are 3 things that you're giving to yourself? I'm beautiful. I could do all things. Oh, hey, I accomplished this goal. So it's versus just kind of being stuck in that space of like what happened to you, but just like giving yourself something along the journey is quite helpful.
So is it more of like an affirmation or more than an affirmation?
I think it's more than affirmation. I think what's helpful in particular with the journaling is it has to make sense from you. Certainly looking out to the internet and, capturing different quotes that might be out there is certainly helpful, but how is it helping you in the moment that you need it? So it has to be personal. For me, one that I've adopted that helps me grounded, and I didn't come up with it, but it's present moment, wonderful moment. So it's just like a reminder for me to be in the present, and no matter what's happening, there's something wonderful happening in the present. So sometimes it could be seen as affirmation, but I think it's like the meaning that we want to be anchored, that it has a meaning to you, useful to you in your journey.
So then, I'd say I've heard the phrase like a word in due season, where someone, kind of reads something and it's like they're reading it for the first time. And as you mentioned, it kind of jumps out of the page at them. It becomes very personal. It seems very relevant to something that's affecting them. And then they will kind of like hold on to that for a while. Or sometimes people will say they just have like a life mantra or life phrase.
Yeah.
And like every time they think of it or say it, it feels very personal to them and it feels very meaningful to them. Would it include things like that?
Yes,
okay,
definitely. The point that I'm making, it has to have that whole meaning for you, and you feel anchored in it. So like you could just really say it to yourself, and you get to the space that you want to be in.
Okay. So, one of the things that I was looking at as I was thinking about this topic of healing from old wounds. I decided to see, what's out there on the internet. What have other people written about this? And what do we think about some of the things that they've written? So I found this article, and it was actually one of those like Psychology Today blogs, 9 Steps to Healing Childhood Trauma as an Adult. And it listed a lot of different things. And so I wanted to kind of talk with Janice today about, what she thinks about some of these suggestions that, popular kind of blogs write about. And one of the things that we, I guess we were kind of alluding to earlier is this idea that it's not just about closure, it's about the journey, but the therapeutic kind of process, this therapy thing where you're just kind of processing and processing and processing, that's not necessarily the only thing. It's not enough. That there's more to it than just meeting with a therapist and talking about it. Janice mentioned that there's some things you could do on your own too to facilitate your own healing and things to kind of make it more personal, kind of figuring out what it is that connects with you. One of the things that they mentioned is this idea of labeling it. I think it's in this article. Labeling what's going on is helpful in some regards. And what do you think about this idea of labeling the issue?
Mm-hmm. So first I want to clarify that labeling, I think I'm not just thinking, or I hope we're not just thinking about victim and survivor in that kind of sense. It's just really looking at your narrative in terms of what happened to you and really putting words to that. I think depending on how you've been wounded in the past, lots of things happen. It's such a confusing process sometimes, especially if it happens as a young person or a kid. You're looking to the adults sometimes to, fill in what the experiences might be, and there may be different versions of it. Or even if it happens to you as an adult, maybe you're just really blaming yourself in terms of being responsible for it. So naming or labeling it, the way I think about it, is the beginning of this healing journey in terms of what are the things that you're going to say to yourself that's going to put you on this path in terms of what happened to you. Mm-hmm. You have to lean into that with just honesty, and quite honestly, it's a bravery in terms of these are my experiences and this is how it affects me. This is how I've grown from it, and this is how I continue to struggle with it. I think if you are leaning into it with such honesty and looking at it that way, it sets you on a path for further things along the journey. So it opens you up. I remember a client, it was just so freeing to say, like, this was my past experience of trauma, and because of that I have bouts with depression. Just is, no judgment, and this is just how it's gonna affect me. It doesn't always have to continue to affect me, but that's what I'm really dealing with now. It opens you up to kind of this process, what's to come, and set you on a path. So I really believe that labeling it is a necessary part of the step.
I guess it makes sense because we say that for other things too.
Yeah.
Like even with we talk to our kids about regulating emotions,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts off with being able to identify what you're even feeling. Like, how can you regulate your anger if you don't recognize that you're angry?
Right.
So this idea of being able to label and say things for what they are, and it seems like even with labeling there is a a bit of acceptance
Yes.
there too. There's an acceptance that comes along with it by saying, you know what, this is just what it is. I have some past trauma, and because of that, I have bouts of depression, and that's just what it is. I've labeled it. I've also accepted that that's what happens. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to work to do anything differently.
Right.
But it just means that I'm honest with myself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it allows us, like it just frees us up. It's an invitation with a narrative, just to invite others into what you might be dealing with, and for you to get understanding and support that you may not get if you're just really closed off in terms of what you're experiencing. I really, it's such a brave process really to label it, and especially when we think about if it's connected to a diagnosis or really all of that stuff, it could just be really scary for a lot of people. But I absolutely would encourage it just to label what's going on for you. And again, if you're truly committed to this healing path, it is what's going to set you on it to kind of come to terms with what truly you're dealing with. And so you could get the support.
Yeah, right. So that's one way of getting support.
Yeah.
How can people help you if you don't know what's wrong, or you're not willing to acknowledge what's wrong, or if you don't know how to describe it? And then we talk a little bit, and the article mentioned something about grounding. And so this idea that where does grounding fit in, and what does it really even mean? And do you agree with that idea of grounding yourself?
Yeah. So this is where I think self-care comes along the way. I must say, when you're embarking on a healing process, lots could come up for you. It probably will feel like the most confusing time in your life. I hate to say this, like you're going crazy, like people don't understand you. You look at everyone kind of differently because you're really trying to find yourself and process a lot that's going on. So it's absolutely necessary to have things that are really grounding you or are connecting you to what's going on presently. Because I think a lot of the times,
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just kind of suggesting the microphone.
Thanks. A lot of the times, because you're recounting past memories, it could just really stir you up and, make you feel like you're a child again. And here I am as an adult. Why am I crying? Why am I going through all that? It's all a part of the process. So I think that's where some of the things, like you mentioned, the mantras might be helpful, or different things that we're really doing to say, like, this is just me, like, looking at my trauma. This is just me processing it. So have tools that would help you, to really sit. A therapist sometimes could really help you find tools that could just really ground you in the moment. But if you're doing or embarking a lot of this on your own, exercise is helpful, or just I always go back to my personal mantra, present moment, wonderful moment, just to remind myself of like the good things that are happening now. And this is just something that's there that I'm really dealing with. So absolutely, I agree with that. Grounding is so important. And I would say, as with everything that we're talking about, you might start off with a certain set of tools or coping skills that you're using, but what you end up landing on is not where you start. So it's almost like you have to be flexible and tapping into what you need in the moment. So it's not everything that worked for someone else will work for you. So you almost have to have a flexibility and to approach it with curiosity. I think that is the word in terms of grounding yourself within this work. And I think, in addition, a way I think about healing, and it's not something you're just doing over here while you exist over here, carry on with your life. It's almost like you have to embody healing. It becomes a part of you because you're just going to be different. You're going to be a different person. And a way to ground yourself is just to really take that on. Like, this is my healing journey, and no judgment. Every step of the way, you're going to be a different person because you're, versus avoiding what has hurt you, you're speaking truth to it and looking at how you could use it to empower yourself to go where you want and to ultimately get to healing.
Mm-hmm. And so when people think about this idea of kind of like grounding themselves in the moment, you mentioned, so one of the things you could do is exercise.
Yeah.
What are some other things that people might do to kind of like ground themselves in the present, like to not get too lost in like, okay, what happened in the past or what you think is going to happen in the future? Just kind of thinking, okay, I'm here right now, the present moment. The present moment is good. The present moment has a lot of potential. So exercise is one thing. What are some other things that people can do to kind of ground themselves, and how do they know when to do that? Like, I think we had spoken a little bit about like anticipating times where things might be difficult for you. So for example, if you know that there's certain things that trigger memories of your trauma, that those would be the moments to like ground yourself. Like, what would you do?
Yeah, so lots of things is helpful in those moments. Sometimes I like to think, and I think about it as like a pie. So, and that's maybe 4 quadrants, I think about it. So you think, what are some things that you could think? That's helpful, some thoughts. What are some things that you could do? That's what we focus on your body. I also think about scents. Different candles. If you look it up on the internet, there are an array of scents that is helpful in those moments that could ground you. So it is a discovery. So, you might be a rose person, you might be a eucalyptus person that could just really help you in terms of candle. And I also think about, so sometimes we can't ground ourselves within our thoughts or really with sense. So sometimes movement helps. So that's where exercise comes. And sometimes that doesn't work. So sometimes you have to go out in nature. I think nature is such a huge grounding opportunity. And I know a lot, and I can't put the plug enough that I think BIPOC folks really need to connect with nature. There's just such great healing possibility there when you're really out there, just really going on a walk. And I know there are lots of things that comes up, like if there's a bear in the woods or not, but then, generally it's safe where you could just go out on a walk and just really being there, just noticing what's around you, noticing the yellow flower, noticing the trees, the bark. It's just really bring you in that moment. So if you can't access thoughts or don't feel like lighting a candle or smelling anything, you could absolutely walk. And then another thing and I have kind of done some exploration too is for myself is chanting. And that is just because I have just allowed myself to see where this process goes, and I think it helps me feel grounded, and it's something else that I could talk to clients about that I see. And so it is, most people are like, how could that really help? But I think it's not so much what you're doing or what you're chanting, is just like it's bringing your awareness to that moment. Sometimes it is the words that you're saying or listening to it. So I think, it's an openness. It's to all the things that are available to us. And I think that is the part of this conversation is not everyone can access therapy, because even though it's out there, there are barriers that gets in the way, but these things are accessible. So I focus on sense, body, thoughts, or things that you can do. I focus hugely on behaviors too. I think routines help us to be grounded. So if it's a tough time in your life, lots of times they're coming up. Like, I'm a huge get up early in the morning person, 5 a.m., 6:30, just to really do things to create space in terms of, what you might need, things to get you grounded so you could start your day. You could do your journaling then, you could dance then, you could listen to music. You could just notice things like the sunrise. For me, those are like my absolute favorite things to do, to notice the sunrise. Every sunrise is so different, and you would be blown away the different things that comes to you as you're, looking at this very natural thing that happens every day, the space it puts you in. So I think about it as a wheel, and at different points you could access different things. So yeah, that's what I would encourage people to do. It doesn't have to be what you're thinking or what you're doing, but just to think about a discovery, and at different times, different things will work.
No, I like this idea because, whenever people encounter any kind of a trigger, so I mean, that could be anything. It could be losing a job, having to change a job. It could be having to move geographically. It could be, I don't know. I mean, any number of things that kind of shakes a person up or kind of creates a kind of a change in their life or reminds them of something bad that happened in the past. Mm-hmm. It could even be a holiday anniversary of somebody passing away or something, happening. And you think, okay, every year at this time, this kind of reminds me of this thing.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of ways that you can kind of ground. And I like the idea of routine. I think routine is one of the things that helps me is if something, kind of bad happens, there's something I can say, there's at least something in my life that's normal.
Yeah.
So let's say on Saturdays, I normally do this particular hobby, no matter what craziness is going on in the world, I can do this hobby every Saturday.
Yeah.
And it's like something that's a constant.
Yes.
And for some people that's running, like we're going running in the morning or going running in the evening or something like that. And it's like, no matter what happens, they can just lace up their shoes and go for a run.
Yeah.
And something about that run just brings them back to a feeling of normalcy, and it kind of helps to ground them. So I'm a big believer in routine. I like the AM routine thing where, some people still get the newspaper.
Yeah.
And they actually in the mornings, they'll get up early, they'll have their cup of coffee, and they will actually read the physical newspaper. And that's the routine for them. And it's very calming, and it gets their day started in such a way that it's like, no matter what craziness happens after I get in my car and get to work, at least I have that time in the morning where things just seem okay.
Yes. Yeah. And so because I'm a huge proponent of morning, I have people like, what about if you're not a morning person? But the idea is to create that space that you need to ground you, to cater to yourself, to do different things. So if you're a night person, you could do some of these things at nights too. But the idea is to do it because I think it is necessary and helpful on this path of healing that you're just really taking care of yourself that way, creating space for you, especially if you have the wounds that we're talking about.
Right. Yeah, and you can definitely have evening routines. Some people have after work routines. They come home, maybe they have a cup of tea, maybe they eat dinner at a certain time, or they have a favorite TV show or something, and they come home and it's their routine to for example, I started watching Family Feud at 8 p.m. The Steve Harvey, which I had never done before, but now I'm like looking at the clock, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's 8 o'clock, Family Feud is on. And it kind of just becomes an evening routine, and it's like, it's silly, but it's I guess it's something that you can kind of set your clock to.
Yes.
Almost, and then after that there's a 9 o'clock news, and you kind of have this routine, and so you can do that evening or morning.
Yes.
I think that's really, really a good idea. You also mentioned the chanting, and I just wanted to ask, is it something that you would kind of chant like your mantra, or what would you chant? How does that work?
So I started by listening to something, Buddhist chant. I always mess it up when it's time to talk about it. I started by doing that, but in terms of listening, because I think I was just trying to expose myself to something else that I've heard people talk about. And then, so I go back and forth. But now I mostly chant my own words or just different things that I want to welcome in my life. So sometimes I might use a word like forgiveness, where I'm just really welcoming that, or really saying what I want to say to that. So those are different ways that I do with it. I pause for a little bit with the chanting because and I always have to highlight it, it's not like a destination that you're just going to get really good with chanting. It is an experience that you have to lean into. For me, and I'm not you're not going to be an expert in chanting. I think what it does is widen your awareness. You're kind of noticing your thoughts. Sometimes if you're in a negative space, you might start by thinking negative thoughts, and sometimes they may float away. But I think with it is just like a curiosity of being within yourself.
Is it a type of meditation? Is it a form of meditation kind of, or?
So I'm certainly not any expert in it, but I would definitely think so because it brings you to that moment. I think one of the things when you've had emotional trauma, a lot of it's very hard to ground yourself and very hard to be in the moment. Like you're thinking about past, present, and future, what it is that you need to do, and some of like those deeper feelings that are always underlying in this. So I think the chanting creates this space where you're in the moment. You're appreciating the moment, and you're probably saying something to yourself that is so needed. So I think you lean into it. That's what I say sometimes.
It's kind of a mindfulness, really.
It is a mindfulness.
Yeah, because as you're describing it, I'm thinking mindfulness meditation, you're focusing your attention on something, you are leaning into the thing that usually you'd be trying to avoid.
Right.
And increasing your capacity, right, for basically having a space for that thing. So it's kind of like a form of mindfulness.
It is
more active though.
It's active, and it is from doing, because the point that I wanted to make, like, you don't get great at it. It's every time it's really different. But to me, it is. And how I've heard others talk about it. So let's say it is fear. It allows you to truly look at what it is that you're afraid of and welcome it, appreciate it. What are you here to teach me about? What's coming up for me in terms of dealing with it. And oftentimes you shift to something else, in terms of your thought or just different messages that might come to you. I think I was sharing with you that one of the times that I was chanting or really in that space, a pendulum came to mind in terms of swinging and,
imagery.
And I was like, where did that come from? I certainly wasn't thinking about pendulum, but I did that in the morning. And as my day went on, I was just like, what is that? It's just like a curiosity in terms of things. And so at the end of the day, it was just like, when you think about the pendulum, it does what it does. It just really flows. So the word that I got or gave to myself was just like, just flow with things, like just be open with what's coming up today, and no focus on mastery or anything. Just focus, no destination. Just go with things. And so those are some things that I took from it. I think others might have different experiences.
And as I'm thinking, like, there's probably so many like different ways you could find the symbolism of pendulum swinging. So they're right. Like it's kind of like taking what you feel personally.
Exactly.
Because a lot of interpretations.
Yes.
Like positive. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now
I also wanted to kind of go back to what you said about nature, and you mentioned even particularly like BIPOC and the connection to nature. And I was just thinking to myself as I was because I've been, periodically reading, history books and things. And I think progressively in the US, there's been this like urbanization of people of BIPOC groups. And so often, like when you look back historically, there was so much more connection to nature for a lot of groups that are, currently considered minorities in the US. Particularly us in the African diaspora, there's so much connection to nature historically, but with all the different things that have happened in the US and in other countries, there's kind of this increasing urbanization and the wealth gap and all of that. And there's like a disconnect from nature because now everybody's living in apartment buildings and people are doing this and that, and they're, taking the train here and there, and they're kind of like, city people now.
Yeah.
And not that this kind of counts for everybody, but just as a kind of a generalization, particularly in places like Boston.
Yeah.
There's this kind of sense of like such a distance from nature.
Yeah.
I feel like you're right. Like there is such a special kind of feeling that happens when you just kind of go out and either you're in a forest area or you're by a lake or even just, any kind of natural kind of structure, it gives you a feeling of like a connection to something greater.
Yes.
And a perspective of like the world that you wouldn't have in your day-to-day grind where you're just Monday through Friday trying to crunch numbers. And then all of a sudden you step out and realize there's this bigger world out here that is existing in kind of this, despite whatever I'm doing.
Yes. Yes. I think, so I like to think that I'm a student of nature. And I always introduce it to clients or anyone that I really talk to, because I do think nature teaches us a lot about healing and a lot about how we should be in the world. The first thing nature teaches us is just like a process. There's a time to bloom and there's a time when the leaves fall off. And if you kind of equate that to life, like sometimes you're doing great and sometimes you're not doing great. And I remember someone that I was talking to shared this, and it always stood with me. Is like, just because in the wintertime the trees doesn't have leaf doesn't mean that it's not alive. And I think that is just like really symbolic of kind of the human experience sometimes. It's not all the time you're really doing well, but you're still alive. There's still life there. So I like that, and I often carry that with me. I think going out in nature, the first thing, especially with urban, people, I think a lot of people used to just like, certain people go there. And if you go there, it's just white folks go in
white
nature.
Spaces.
Yeah, white spaces. Why are you going there? But we're really robbing off ourselves from like those experiences and really hiking. So when you go out there, you're noticing the world that's really bigger than you and your place in it. You're seeing beauty, and I just often, like, for me, when I go out there, I may start off with like, this whatever is going on, what I need to go. And there is a moment where I'm just noticing the sounds that are around, birds that are really chirping. So I really do encourage a lot of people, people to just go out, experience it, not looking for anything, but see what it kind of teaches you about yourself. You could walk, you could pray, you could listen to music, and sometimes you see pets along the way. You could just connect with people. I think all those things add to it.
Yeah. And it's a grounding experience when things get rough. And one of the things that you had mentioned was using fragrances or scents, like candles. And I've said before on the show that there is this whole field of aromatherapy.
Yeah.
And that it sounds a little bit hokey, but it makes sense because there's so much that's actually related to scents. And the olfactory system, which is a system for where we kind of has the sense of smell, the nerves for the olfactory system come very close to the outside of the body because they're in the nose. There's like this direct connection between the nose and the brain, with a very thin kind of piece of bone. So that connection between the nose and the brain is a very direct hit. So fragrances and scents actually have quite an impact on the brain. I think probably the most familiar is if a scent reminds you of a person or reminds you of an experience. Sometimes I have a fragrance and I'm like, that reminded me of this person that used to wear that cologne, or this reminds me of like the scent of freshly cut grass might bring you back to your childhood, or something like that. So fragrances are really powerful. And then some fragrances have bad memories, some have good memories. So figuring out, as you mentioned, like what scents carry kind of a positive kind of effect on you, but also have some meaning that helps to kind of ground you.
Yes. And it's such a whole world out there in terms of discovering that. I think, some people tend to, fruity scents or rose scents, or you might like more woodsy scents. It's who's to say what might be helpful for you, but I strongly encourage exploring that. My favorite scents are really rose because it's just warmth, and when it's just like really in the room, it just makes me feel love, and that's what I'm like really trying to welcome in my life. So absolutely, sometimes you're really flooded with emotions. You could really light a candle or submerge yourself in a bath with your the scents that you might like, and again, it's not really processing anything. It's just like really being in that space and what's like really comforting for you, what feels good for you, and it really truly has healing properties in terms of that. So you could quickly do a Google search in terms of all of the different scents that are out there. I know lavender is a huge one too for a lot of people. Eucalyptus is helpful, but there's like a large array of things that you could just really have on hand. And believe it or not, some people use sage too. That scent is kind of when there's something like strong or heavy in the room that they really need to move. So certainly all of that is helpful and connected to healing. And I don't know if people might always connect that or think that it's important, but these are simple things that you can do that could just ground you in the moment, and even as you're thinking about healing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason that, you know, multiple different religions in the world use like incense, like burning incense and fragrances that are kind of included as part of their religion. Even in Christianity, there's mention of fragrances in the Bible that have significance. So there's definitely, you know, it's not a small thing to kind of think about how scents can be helpful.
Yeah.
And then the other thing you mentioned with helping to heal from old wounds is movement. And I've had someone, actually a couple of people on the show talk about movement. In particular, we've had yoga practitioners, and then people who have done dance, and people who have done different kinds of other things like Zumba and like other kind of cardio. And so I know not everybody is an exercise buff. I certainly have a hard time keeping up with exercise routine, but movement can take a lot of different forms. So it's, to me, I always kind of say the importance is being active in some way and trying to be less sedentary. What are your thoughts about the use of movement?
Yeah. Absolutely love movement, and it's so necessary. I think you just have to figure out what works for you. For some people, it might be lifting weights, some people running, some people kickboxing, some people acrobatic stuff, different thing. As long as you're really moving, it's beneficial. So one of the things that's worth lifting up is trauma could stay in our body, and you know, and it's a way sometimes to really move it or just to work through your system. And again, it's accessible. That is the point. So whatever it is that you like, I would encourage people to explore it, you know, in terms of what works for you. And if you're going to add movement in terms of when you're thinking about your coping skill or your healing journey, what it is that you could stick to or really do it. A lot of people do running or that type of things. And yoga is such a huge part. I recently took a training, and I thought that it was just like trauma focused yoga. And it was really about how, because I have to think about yoga like you have to be flexible and really all that, but it's just
how I think about it too.
And that's how I used to do it and hurt myself. But you know, I would recommend trauma focused yoga, because apparently that was beneficial for that. It's not about mastering anything. It's just a discovery along the way. Your body, as you're moving, what's coming up? How do you lean into it? How do you move it and shift it? Or what is that part of your body telling you what you need? But I can't stress enough, and I think my favorite is dancing. And there, you know, there is in the field, there is dance therapy, and a lot of people probably don't even think about that.
They probably don't even know.
As healing. And I think my personal favorite is just kind of dancing to drumming, because it's just like whatever comes up for you, and there's such a freedom in dancing. And certainly you could take a hip hop class or all the other different types of dancing, but movement connects you, I think, to your soul. Soul is a huge part of this healing, you know, connecting you to that, and that, just like that freedom. And I'm sure you're the psychiatrist, so talk about the endorphins that it might release when you're in that space of just, you know, just really sweating, and that freedom, allowing your body to move, is certainly beneficial and has healing properties. So I can't stress that enough. So take that dance class or just do drumming. I know that we've been on lockdown for a while, but you know, dancing is.
And guys, I'll see if I can kind of look up some of the resources. Melissa Alexis from Cultural Fab had come on the show last month, and she had all these resources for places for even there's some of their outside, like in Cambridge, by the river. So like it's gonna be safe from like a infectious disease perspective. You know, like you can be outside doing yoga or doing dance or other kinds of movement. The good thing about the summer is there's a lot of these kinds of things that kind of pop up outdoors. Even I can say in downtown Boston, I remember going to a conference once and seeing this huge kind of like exercise class on just on like a square patch of grass, like a park in between two hotels. And there was a ton of people just exercising. And it was just kind of fun to see people just coming out. And there's a lot of, I think if you just kind of look it up online, you might be able to find some of these different things, and it can be so grounding to activate your own body. And if you notice, all of these things, most of them, they didn't require a whole lot of talking in terms of like talking about the issue. You're processing it without talking about it. You're processing it in your body, in your senses. And that's what's very grounding, is that, I mean, how can you possibly describe in words an old emotional wound? It's not really possible to adequately describe in words what you're going through, what you're feeling, what you're thinking. It's just kind of, you have to really just experience it. I think that this is definitely a helpful place for people to start. We kind of talked about labeling, and we talked about all the different methods for kind of grounding. And I don't know if there's any other things you wanted to mention as we kind of wrap up. I know you mentioned just a little bit, we had talked a little bit about this idea of the journey and how we had talked about earlier, the idea of how pain, you can develop your own perspective on pain and your own sense of meaning of what pain is in your own life. Do you want to maybe mention that here in closing?
I think in society, I think I think this is just reinforced by society a lot. We try to avoid pain. And through my work, personal experiences, people that are in my life, pain is a part of life. There is no way that you can avoid it. So it's worth kind of exploring and kind of appreciating what pain teaches us. I think a lot of the times when we're hearing people, giving their testimony, there's a lot of pain in that in terms of what they've had to overcome. So you could really learn from pain. You could really help others from pain, and you could really heal from pain. And this is what the message is. Healing is absolutely possible. But what we could do for ourselves is to, as much as it's reinforced in society, like there isn't the space for it. It's just like really own your pain. Deal with it up front, and to approach it with such bravery. I guarantee you what's on the other side is really gonna be beneficial for you. It's really gonna allow you to live the life that you really want to live in a lot of the space. And I think more importantly, as a community, for us to flourish, because that is the end goal. I think some of these things could just really get in the way of us feeling good about ourselves. So that is the message.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, Janice. It was such a joy to have you. I'll have to invite you back. There's so much more to say about healing from emotional wounds. We can probably talk about more even later on in the summer. So thanks for those who were listening in today. You've been listening to Black Mental Health Matters. I'm Dr. Carryann Williams. My guest today was Janice Brownhill. We're talking about healing from old emotional wounds. And if you guys want to hear more on Black mental health, you can continue to tune into my show every Sunday, 1 p.m. on 98.1 FM, The Urban Heat. Take care.
Great.
Hey, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the show today. For more on Black mental health, go to my website. That's drkerryann.net, drkerryann. From there, you can see past shows and other content. You can also follow me on Instagram, also at drkerryann. And there you can DM me, you can ask me questions. Maybe I can answer those questions on the air. You can also make suggestions for future topics or future guests that I should interview. So keep tuning into my radio program, Black Mental Health Matters, Sundays at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on heat981fm.com. So I'll check in with you later. Bye.